This session, Tim's going to join us in a little while, but this session was more of a relaxed session, and to find out more about our wonderful speakers, and to see if you guys have got some questions as well. But really, I have no voice left. I have nothing. So I'll try my best, but I'm sounding more like a man every time I open my mouth. But I'm going to just sit here and have a nice chat because, you know, we've got a more condensed audience, which is fine. But it's been quite interesting because some of the sessions have been, you know, standing room only. And it's interesting to see what topics are you know, the most interesting. But just in a nutshell, my name is Karin Ridgers. I'm sorry if you've been to one of these sessions before and you're going to hear probably the same sort of stuff. But I work very closely with Tim, who organises VegfestUK. VegfestUK started probably about 18 years ago in Bristol. And Tim actually used to organise illegal raves. So he went from illegal raves to organising vegan festivals.
You off?
Was that someone shouting? Oh, don't know what that was. And then we came down to Brighton, so this is our 9th year in Brighton, and Brighton really holds a special place in our hearts because really, there's nowhere on the planet, there's nowhere in the UK. I bet that's Tim, and he doesn't realise his microphone's on, and he's talking. I hope he hasn't gone to the toilet. Oh my God! Cut the sound if we hear rushing water. So yeah, we come to Brighton about 9 years ago. We were over in Hove, moved over here, and we'll be in Bristol in May, and then London, and then we launched a couple of years ago in Glasgow, but we won't be back to Glasgow till next year. Come on in. We thought you'd nipped to the loo and left your mic on. I said we'd have to cut the sound if it's like running water. Thank God, yeah. Thought I'd share.
Very nice of you. Cheers, love.
But yeah, so look, you guys, anyone here vegan already? Yeah, and the rest of you thinking about going vegan perhaps? Yeah? Oh, that's really great. Well, obviously, you're in the right place. I'm going to hand over, just first of all, to the speakers to maybe just introduce themselves really, and tell us a little bit about, you know, why they're here. So let's start with you, lovely nutritionalist from the NHS, which I think is really quite interesting because it seems to be, I would have thought, more private nutritionalists maybe would be exploring veganism a bit more. But however, it's really refreshing to hear someone on the NHS and obviously vegan as well. So it's lovely. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so my name's Amy and I'm a dietitian working with children that have got type 1 diabetes. I only turned vegan probably about a year ago, so that's why I'm still mainly working in the NHS, haven't really found anything outside of that yet. But certainly it's changed my perspective on how I treat children and their diets and just trying to make them as healthy as possible. I certainly won't be persuading them to go vegan, but we can only do the best we can for increasing the information around it.
So what was your vegan journey like?
Mine actually started from having more kind of irritable bowel type symptoms. And I did all the evidence-based guidelines as a dietitian, as you do, and improved to a certain extent, but not completely. So I thought, let's try taking a bit of meat out. And it got better and better and better. And then my friend went vegan, and I learned a lot more about it through that. And it was a gradual change. I still couldn't quite give up the junk food. But eventually decided to, mainly the animal rights side of things, finally sunk in after kind of blocking it off for so long through my life, because I did want to go vegetarian when younger, but my parents were not supportive. So I think I'd put a barrier up for my whole life. So, yeah.
Good.
Okay, that's lovely. Well, let's hear from Otto as well, Otto Brockway, who I embarrassed yesterday by spilling the beans that you're Richard Branson's nephew, aren't you? And went out with Princess Eugenie. So we've got, just makes me just laugh that, you know, we're all just regular people having a chat, you know, he's just there with his jeans on and whatever. And, you know, there he is in Buckingham Palace. It's just a crazy life we lead. So tell us about you, because obviously, you know, how long have you been vegan, first of all?
6 years.
6 years. But it's had a big impact on you because you're
Yeah.
now talking to super duper people about veganism.
Yes, yeah.
What was your journey into veganism?
I guess it must have been about 10 years ago. I was watching a program on Sky called Supreme Master Television. And yeah, as soon as I saw some of those animal cruelty videos, I just, instantly I kind of had to just stop eating meat. And then I think, yeah, it was about 6 years ago. A few of my friends started going vegan. I'd never heard of vegan, and as soon as they showed me, what happens to the cows and the chickens and stuff, that was kind of it too. So yeah,
Just really made sense. And it's interesting because, really the reason I went vegetarian 25 years ago is because I was handed a book at a Mind, Body, Soul event, and I thought, oh, my dad will like that because my dad's veggie. And it was the book by the Supreme Master Ching Hai. And, my dad read it, and my dad said, oh, why don't you read it? And I said, oh, I don't want to read it, Dad. And then I stuffed it in my gym bag. And then one day I thought, oh, I'm going to treat myself, have 10 minutes in the sauna. Oh, I know, I'll read that booklet that I got my dad. And in this booklet, it didn't say meat. It described animal flesh. And it just was that light bulb moment that I was eating the rotting flesh of dead animals. I mean, why hadn't anyone told me this before? And it was just so powerful. And obviously, the Supreme Master Ching Hai, her work, I've won her Shining Heroine Award as well, which is the awards in my office, which is wonderful. So it's lovely to obviously meet people. But it's quite funny because they're quite small over here. I mean, in America, there's bank holidays named after Supreme Master, and everyone knows her. But it's quite quiet over here, unless you go to the Loving Hut, and then you got it on the screen. But they came over here and they filmed with Benjamin Zephaniah.
yes.
And Benjamin Zephaniah said, you've got to go and meet Karin Ridgers. You've got to film with Karin Ridgers. And I was so blessed. I thought, God, that's amazing. So, and then he because of that, they sent their film crew and they filmed me. But they didn't actually realise it was because of Supreme Master 20-odd years before, 15 years before, that I went vegetarian. So it was all quite a nice, weird, crazy circle. And I'm very good friends with them. So, it's just even more lovely to have Otto here. And Otto, you are a film director, aren't you? And you're making probably one of the most exciting vegan films. I hope we're okay to share this, because I know it's sort of early days.
Yeah,
but
no,
it's
I
the
don't mind.
most exciting film that I've heard of or been hearing about for a very long time.
Yeah, so, one thing that I guess I found in my own journey of trying to kind of inspire others to kind of move towards a vegan lifestyle is some of the amazing tools of films, documentaries I'm sure you maybe have seen or at least heard of, like Cowspiracy or Forks Over Knives or Earthlings. And but one thing I've also found over the years is it's hard enough getting someone to sit down and watch one of these films, let alone kind of a number of them, to try and show them, the entire case for someone kind of or the world moving towards a vegan lifestyle. So one thing that I've kind of wanted to do over the last couple of years is put a film together that kind of covers all the most of what I believe are, the most important aspects of, creating the case for someone to move towards or shift to a vegan lifestyle. So we've kind of been laying the groundwork, and hopefully in about a year from now we'll have the film finished.
Ed, I'd like to just come on to you actually there. Do you want to, have we introduced
Well, yeah,
it?
no,
Yes, we have
that's it.
introduced
It's
yeah.
more about, hello.
Sure, so,
Hey,
Great to
introduce
see
yourself.
you here. So, yeah, please tell us a bit more about you and your vegan journey as well.
yeah, sure. So my name's Ed, but I have a YouTube channel which I'm most commonly known for, which goes under the name of Earthling Ed. And I guess I'll go through my vegan journey quickly. It's not particularly eventful. I decided, well, actually, I heard on the newspapers that there was a truck full of chickens that had crashed on the motorway about 3 years ago. And I still ate meat at the time, and I was really upset about the chickens because I thought how horrible it would be for them to be on this motorway, confused, maybe getting hit by cars, or maybe running into fields and not knowing what's going to happen to them. And I felt deeply sorry for them. But then someone pointed out the hypocrisy by me saying that, because they were getting driven to slaughter anyway, and they were going to be killed. And that was the moment where I realized that if I cared about animals in any degree, I should stop eating them. So I went veggie at the time, and I didn't think about dairy and eggs. And in fact, I said to a vegan, or someone who wanted to go vegan, I said, there's no point going vegan, it's a waste of time. Animals don't have to die for dairy and eggs, so what's the point? And that's something I said, and I held close to that for quite some time, actually, and then someone educated me on that, and I ended up watching Earthlings one morning, just kind of spontaneously. I didn't really want to do so, but it was put on, and I thought, well, I'll watch it, I've got nothing better to do. And then an hour and a half later, I'm crying my eyes out, thinking, right, I've got to go vegan now. And I didn't know any vegans at the time, so I kind of went vegan on my own. And that was kind of the journey I started on, and then it was started to get put in my head that I needed to become a bit more active, and I needed to kind of be a voice for the animals. Merely living a vegan lifestyle is a passive action, it doesn't actually save any animals necessarily. And being a vegan meant I had the duty and the responsibility to go out there and make other people turn vegan, or at least see the vegan conclusion. So that's why I set up my YouTube channel, inspired by some other people I looked up to. But I kind of started like in a bit of a niche, I guess, where I started doing some interviews on the streets. And I'd go up to people on the street randomly, and I'd start asking them questions about why they ate meat, the morality of doing so, and the ethics of consuming animals and killing animals for any purpose. And it turned out that I kind of had a natural knack for doing so, and I was fortunate enough, because through doing my YouTube, I'd kind of educated myself in many of the aspects of veganism, in the environment, the health, and the ethics as well. So it kind of came naturally to me to be able to kind of rebut the arguments that meat eaters would use against veganism. And the more you do it, the easier and easier it becomes, because they start to use the same arguments over and over again. It's a regurgitation of the same nonsense. And eventually you have all the answers in your head, and it's just a matter of going on autopilot and correcting them and tripping them up at every logical, hurdle that they try and cross. And I guess that's kind of how it started. And then I branched out into other activism. So I set up an activist group in London called Surge with a few other activists, and we put on the Animal Rights March last year, which had 2,500 vegans marching through London, and that was really powerful.
Anyone go out of interest? Anyone was at Surge? At the Animal Rights
Very
March?
good.
Yeah.
So we put that on, and we're going to have another one the 2nd of September. And so my activism's broadened out. So what started just as YouTube and as doing interviews in the streets is now broadened into running protests, running campaigns, and events like that, really. And I suppose that's my journey to this point now. Yeah.
And it's really cool, because I love it, because I'm meeting a lot of people now that they don't bother with vegetarianism, they jump straight into veganism. And I'm also meeting a lot of people, obviously, like Earthling Ed, that, it's not good enough to just go vegan. You've got this burning desire inside of you, because, you feel fantastic, and it's going to cure the world of so many problems, and you just want to share it. And it's just so lovely to meet people now that, they do want to, in their way, whether it's YouTube or films or through health or through events or whatever it is, inspire other people. Because it just is so fantastic. There's nothing to beat it.
See, Ed, I noticed actually talking about inspiring other people. Ed was on BBC TV probably last month, was it?
Late January.
In January, late January. It was quite a major piece, wasn't it? There was some activity going on in London. Ed was interviewed. And Ed, I believe, is the first person to pretty much say on BBC mainstream TV as identifying as an abolitionist vegan. So, Ed, I would like to ask you, would you like to explain what you mean when you say I'm an abolitionist vegan? What's that do you mean by that?
So abolitionism is where you oppose the use of animals for any purpose, any exploitation of animals. So abolitionist vegans want to see the end of not only the food industries, but also clothing, animal testing, entertainment, anything where we use objectified and commodify animals, we want to abolish, and that's primarily what it means.
Would you not say, though, that that's what veganism means anyway? I mean, veganism is defined as a way of life or philosophy that seeks to exclude the use of animals wherever possible and practical for anything, for food, for clothing, for entertainment. So presumably, really, veganism by nature is abolitionist.
I mean, in its core, it should be, but I think we've had problems, maybe in the past decade or so, where we've had a rise of plant-based, haven't we? And veganism, I think, to many people, has lost the animal rights aspect, and it's become more about health and well-being and treating your own body right. And I suppose we can blame the health movement, and obviously that's been useful in a sense because it's driven more people away from meat, dairy, and eggs. But the downside of that is people take veganism less seriously as an animal rights issue. And I feel that part of the challenge we have now as activists is to not just show veganism as being a food issue or a diet issue, but being the whole exploitation of animals across the board. And you're right, in its core, it's an abolitionist thing, but for some reason...
So you think really what you're saying is possibly veganism has slightly got perhaps sort of watered down or redefined as something that's not really veganism, which is why we now have to really refer to veganism as abolitionist veganism to ensure that people understand this is about abolishing the use of animals, full stop.
I mean, it's
not just picking and choosing which animal you may or may not want to
There we
exploit.
go, yeah. And I think somewhere along the lines, animal rights and veganism kind of got split up, and I don't know if it was to do with the ALF taking the animal rights in a different direction, but I was having a conversation with someone just before the march, and I said, oh, it's a vegan march, and he went, oh, I won't take part in that, but I would take part in an animal rights march. And I said to him, what's the difference? He said, oh, there's a big difference. And I said, veganism is animal rights, and the two, are not mutually exclusive, right? They're the same thing, and he couldn't understand it. He thought animal rights was different to veganism, and that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, and actually that's a problem that we need to address, I think, and get the majority of people in mainstream society back into realizing that veganism is animal rights. The health and the environment are, interlinked, but at its core, it's about animals, and that's what we need to focus on, or at least in my interpretation is.
Interestingly, early on when animal rights pretty much concept that was invented, I suppose, or first kind of coined and explained probably by Tom Reagan. Tom Reagan in the late 70s, and in 1983, Tom Reagan wrote a book, Empty Cages. And Tom Reagan was the original, he was a philosopher who actually died a couple of weeks ago, actually, Tom. He was a sort of original philosopher who, in many respects, sort of developed this concept of animal rights as we know it today. But interestingly, when animal rights was first developed, it was not in line with veganism. There's no sort of mention of veganism. There was a sort of animal rights thing, but animal rights didn't seem to connect up to not actually using animals yourself. So, I don't know, it's a very interesting history that's got us from animal rights that didn't include a veganism to veganism that doesn't include animal rights. And we seem to be perhaps trying to clear up that mess by defining a plant-based diet that may or may not include a little bit of animal product with veganism, which is a philosophy that seeks to exclude all animal use.
I wonder if there's a problem with the terminology. Sometimes the word rights has issues because we can grant, we've granted women fundamental rights, but it doesn't mean they're treated the same way. So sometimes I have issues with the word animal rights because we can grant them rights, like the right not to be enslaved and killed, but that doesn't mean that people's attitudes towards them will necessarily change. I don't know if we should refer to it as animal liberation. That seems to be more just to the mission that we're fighting for. So I don't know if there's a little bit of discrepancy with the word rights there. And I think people get confused, well, what rights do you want to give them? And you say, well, the right to live, the right to be free from oppression. But we sometimes get a bit muddled by that term, I think.
I think perhaps coming back to you as a health nutritionist working in the NHS, you mentioned that you can't always mention veganism. It's almost like a bit of a step too far. So perhaps in a way you might... interesting, Dorothy and Donald Watson, who founded the Vegan Society in 1944, Donald used to refer to this concept of ripening people to veganism. Realizing that a lot of it, well, nearly all of us come from this deeply entrenched, we're brought up using animals from day one. And to go from that deeply entrenched position to a position where we don't use any animals at all, sometimes does require people to be ripened to the idea. And I would say perhaps what you're doing in many respects is ripening people to the idea. And so using the idea of a plant-based diet to try and really ripen people or bring people to understanding veganism, would you say that's a fair...
Yeah, certainly the advice that I give is based around the Eat Well guide. As part of the NHS and what the government promotes, but I will mainly be promoting the fruit and veg section, the carb section, the alternative milk section, and then the beans and pulses and nuts and seeds, and trying to get them to actually replace and explaining the negatives about the meat, so the saturated fats, the cancer, all that sort of thing, and getting them to have more days where they maybe have one vegetarian day or something like that. Because most of my patients and their families are all meat eaters, meat, potato, 2 veg every night. So just trying to suggest trying one vegetarian meal to them is like, whoa, that's a bit too far.
So that's the kind of reaction that you're getting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but some of them are really receptive because it depends how important because I come from obviously the health of the body point of view. It depends how important they hold that in them. So the ones that are really passionate about making sure their children are really healthy, they're the ones that will make those changes based on the suggestions that I've made.
Where are you based, out of interest?
Down in Kent.
Kent. I mean, that's an affluent area, isn't it? You would have thought they would be quite interested.
Yeah, the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells is my area that I cover.
Okay.
Maidstone mainly. I'd say Canterbury, where I live, is very pro-vegan.
Right.
It's much better, but Maidstone, stuck in a
So
rut.
it's interesting in a way that what we've got here, you're kind of helping ripen people to veganism by just introducing to plant-based. Your films are really seeking to cover almost all aspects of veganism, but still including people who are yet vegan. And then Ed, your messages are clear. Look, we're just going to abolish the use of animals, full stop. And I think that actually in some ways does, without any planning at all, quite accurately reflect what is going on in the country and indeed on a global level. Is there's the 3 steps really that are people really just getting to grips with the first ABCs. Then you've got people who are really coming on board. This is really making an impact and making significant lifestyle changes without necessarily going the whole way, as it were. And then we've got a point where we actually get to, you know what, we're just not going to use animals at all, full stop. It's like that simple. Not quite that simple, but in concept. Well, let me ask you, one of the things we hear quite a lot of, supposedly, is this recidivism, is that people go vegan, and then they're vegan for a bit, and then they stop bothering. Now, some research supposedly indicates that up to 75% of people who go vegan go back to eating animals. Personally, in my 33 years of being vegan, I've never actually met anybody, no I have, I can think of one person I've known as vegan in that time who's then actually gone back to maybe just eating a little bit of eggs or something occasionally. How valid do you think that is? Otto, let me ask you, do you think we've got a risk of people, we're putting all this effort into helping people go vegan, you know, there's this easy veganism and vegan festivals all over, everywhere, and you've got plant-based milks taking over the supermarkets, you've got vegan heavyweight boxers and footballers and film stars, and, you know, is there a danger, though, that we're going to miss the message and perhaps not really get to a vegan world?
Well, I mean, my personal opinion on that, I guess, because I spend so long looking at the science and with one thing that I want my film to be used for is a tool for policymakers around the world to make decisions, whether it's to do with subsidies going to the livestock industries, because there's no way now with the environmental destruction that has already taken place in the last 50 years, mainly due to animal agriculture, that there isn't going to be some level of societal collapse that we're all going to see in our lifetimes. But from what all the models were predicting, and I think there's something about over 700 different models, main models, which are used to kind of predict the way that most of the kind of climatic systems work. All the models that what they were predicting, say 20 years ago, most of them were so wrong compared to what's actually happening now. Things are happening so much faster that I think in one sense we're going to be forced to change. And I mean, for me, my goal with my team is to try and get the information out to as many policymakers, leaders as possible, so that as the collapse begins to happen, they really go, the main problem is animal agriculture, and there's no option out of having to cut drastically the subsidies, which I believe is the lifeblood going to the industry. And I mean, if I give you just an idea of how much money is going in Europe to the animal agriculture industry, 45% of money in the European Union goes to agriculture. 45%. Now, 90% of that is animal agriculture. Only 10% goes to fruit and vegetables. And 80% of that money goes to just 5 corporations. I think it's Cargill, Tyson, I forget the names of the other big meat companies. And I mean, these guys single-handedly, in many respects, are just destroying the world in ways that most people couldn't begin to imagine. And when you really look at the science, it's horrifying, it's terrible, it's scary. But one of the positive things is that two of the worst greenhouse gases are methane and nitrous oxide, and the main source of those is animal agriculture. So I genuinely believe, and we're starting to see it now, and I think governments now are really beginning to wake up to some level. They're seeing there's a collapse now happening. One of the biggest things that we're all going to suffer from is food security. And I think just in the last few months, we've all seen that there's now food rationing that's been going on.
Iceberg lettuces, yeah.
Yes.
I hear they're £50 at each stand down in the lanes in Brighton.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we actually, there's a lot of leaked documents now from the big supermarkets, which made us realize how scared they are of this, because the food system, the climate is so unstable in Europe now that they're having to bring in, they're not telling them about this, a lot of food, extra surplus food from America to try and fill up the supermarket shelves, because they're so worried that they don't have vegetables now. And the coffee industry is on its way to collapsing because all the coffee plantations are being destroyed. So many plants now being destroyed around the world from climatic change, that we're definitely going to see some level of collapse. One thing that they don't tell you is that when carbon goes into the atmosphere, I think it takes between 30 and 50 years before you actually see a warming effect. So the warming that we're seeing happening now, which is happening so much faster than all the models predicted, is from basically the 1950s and 1960s. Wow. So even if we stopped all of the carbon going into the atmosphere right now from any source, we would still see a warming effect for the next 30 to 50 years. That would probably melt enough of the methane stores in the North Pole, which would raise the temperatures up. My uncle actually has and has had with Vice President Al Gore a competition, if you will, where they're offering $25 million to the first person that can produce some sort of method, some sort of technology that can basically take X amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. Because unless we could stop all industry, we could stop all the cars, unless we find a way of taking X amount of carbon out of the atmosphere, then we've had it. And we can say this with a certain degree of certainty because of the previous 5 mass extinctions, 4 of them were caused by warming events from carbon in the atmosphere. So last time I spoke to my uncles, maybe about 3 months ago, they've had the competition for this Earth Challenge prize, I think for about 8 years now. I said, has anyone come close to finding a method that can reduce this, take X amount of carbon out of the atmosphere? And, he said, actually, no one's come close. We've had hundreds of thousands of people, putting forward ideas and amazing things, and people have put a lot of money into this and a lot of time, but no one's come close to be able to taking this amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. So I said to him, they say that there isn't a known method, but actually, and this is according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for the United Nations, we do have a method, and that is through a massive reduction in livestock farming. And if we can do that, then the scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say that naturally, very quickly, enough vegetation would grow back in those fields that we're using to grow corn and soy for factory farm, mostly chickens, and at the same time, we would, most people don't realize 40% of fish that's fished out of the sea is fed to factory farm, mostly chicken, but also kind of cows, pigs, that we would stop that. The sea would begin to heal itself, the fish would come back, the plankton would come back, the sea would be able to take carbon out of the atmosphere, produce more oxygen, and then the land that we've kind of cut down and we have covered with soy and corn all over the world for factory farm feed would naturally be allowed to grow again, and very quickly that would take out a massive amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. It would stop releasing nitrous oxide, which is 300 times worse than CO2, and the climate to a certain degree would stabilize and give us a chance to save at least a part of civilization. You know, the sea levels are going to rise. We're probably going to lose some of the major cities on the planet, but at least we could continue.
Do you think though that if we go vegan, is that going to help?
Yes.
So do you still think that the people have the power on this?
I like to, yeah. Okay. I think so. I think people are waking up. I feel like from everything I've seen.
We can overturn this?
Yes.
Do you think we can reverse this cycle?
I think so, yes.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and maybe it's a catalyst that will help push people towards that. Yeah.
Okay, guys, look, we're pretty short on time, so I know this gentleman here wanted to ask a question. I'm just going to give you the mic so that you can pick up on the camera, so when they watch the film, they'll know what you've asked them. There you go.
First of all, earlier we spoke about Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm pretty sure just last week he invested a lot of money in a frozen seafood company. So I don't see him going vegan anytime soon, unfortunately. And he's also with that Salt Bay thing. I've seen a picture go around. So yeah, he speaks at a lot of environmental conferences, and then he goes and does that. It's just really
between you and me, I think he's useless, really.
Yeah. But my main question was, I became vegan in January 2016, and I became active in October last year after the Animal Rights March that Ed arranged through Surge. And then I was exposed to the idea that being vegan is just a moral baseline, in that when you're vegan, you're choosing not to participate in cruelty. And we hear a lot about being vegan is a compassionate choice. So like, make the compassionate choice, go vegan. If I walk down the street and choose not to stab someone, that doesn't make me compassionate. So I don't think choosing not to kill animals unnecessarily makes you compassionate. So what do you guys think of the idea that being vegan is just a moral baseline and that's the least we can do?
Ed? Good question, mate.
It is
Good question.
Is that working? Yeah. It is a moral baseline. I think the difference between the two examples you used is that it's never been socially acceptable to stab someone down the street. Whereas it has been socially acceptable to kill animals. So to step outside what's socially acceptable is in itself quite a defined act. So to not kill animals could be deemed as compassionate because most people around us do kill animals, whereas most people around us don't stab humans. But the point you make is a valid point. I agree that not killing animals doesn't necessarily make you an inherently good person. Often we find out that many vegans aren't necessarily good people, and they might have other values that don't.
We have noticed actually some vegans can get awfully unpleasant to other people because they believe so clearly that we shouldn't use animals. It can unleash quite a negative, destructive force. It's something very important to keep in check because I think the reason for that though is because there is, when you do start understanding, there's this guilt, there's this complicity that you've been doing all that, and then you suddenly realise, oh my goodness, that is really unacceptable behaviour. And I think then there's this sort of almost rush to try and, everybody's got to understand this. And it can become really overpowering and quite unpleasant to humans. I think veganism suffers sometimes from a lack of compassion for humanity.
I think that's true, and it's easy to understand why. It's like this stuff Otto has been saying just a moment ago, and when we witness the overwhelming magnitude of the way that we treat and abuse animals, it's only natural that we're going to feel some level of anger. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. Feeling emotions like anger and frustration and sadness aren't negative in themselves because it's the way that you use those emotions. Now, if I was overly happy all the time, I wouldn't get out of bed and go on the street and protest. right? But it's that anger that gets me out of bed, that gets me on the streets, that gets me talking to people. So it's about how we use those emotions. So you don't need to shut them off entirely. It's about finding that balance between hopeful and positive, that we can make a positive change, but also keeping that negativity in check and knowing, let me feel that anger, let me feel that frustration. So yeah, but some people don't find that balance, and they can then become too angry. They can then be violent and hate humanity. And like, I can see how that can happen. I think most of us probably can, but it's about using what's most effective. And if you really care about animals, you have to take a step back and go, is me being violent going to help the animals in the long run? And it won't. And it won't help the environment.
That's something that Tom Reagan said, actually.
Right.
You know, Tom Reagan, one of his famous quotes, which I can't quite remember exactly, but along the lines of, I don't want to be a bad advocate for animals. I don't want to put people off. Yeah. So trying to, disciplining yourself to use anger. I mean, again, quoting John Lydon from 1979, anger is an energy, and if you can use
like
anger, to do just what you said, Ada. Amy, just let me ask you, what would your reaction be if you started telling your NHS patients that veganism is a moral baseline? What do you think would happen?
I've absolutely no uproar, probably. I don't think it would go down too well.
Might need a different approach.
Yeah. Just from my experience, I feel very alone being a vegan with my family and everyone who's taken such a "what on earth are you doing to me" type attitude. So I can see that if I were to say that to them, they would have a meltdown.
It's a moral baseline, isn't it? I mean, we shouldn't be using animals.
Yeah.
It's like there shouldn't be.
But they can't see
it's
it.
The least we should do is not use them. It might not make us compassionate, but we really shouldn't be just using animals for convenience. So it is a moral, I think, and I think there is a bottom line is we shouldn't use animals. But what you're saying is you don't think that approach would really work with your patients. Oh, that's really interesting.
No.
One more question here. This gentleman here.
I've just got two aspects to this, and Otto, probably, if you can help. The first one would be the institutions of power. Religion is one of them. And if there is an effective and efficient way of living in a vegan world that can reverse the damage you talk about, then one of the most powerful voices is religion. And I'd like to understand what you think the prospect of trying to make all religious organized, we're not talking about one religion or another, making a difference to the argument. And the second one is you talk about Al Gore, and he is part of the economic growth cycle. He's part of the process that wants economic growth. So the politics of it are very difficult, aren't they? So, for example, there's a gentleman you may know called Dr. Salish Rao, who does climate healers. And he was involved with Al Gore in the Inconvenient Truth, but apparently he was shut down very quickly by Al Gore when he started talking about the things you're saying.
Sure, yes.
So those two aspects, the politics and the religion.
Yes.
Going to have to be quick. We've got 2 minutes because we're losing some of our technical staff.
Okay. Well, very quickly, just to answer your first question, something that I've actually was doing before was trying to see if we could get the Church of England to help us on our crusade to get all the Christians in England, and then ultimately we were going to use that model with the Catholics around the world, because we found a number of things. It's very hard to argue with a Christian that really believes in the word of the Bible that eating meat is not okay, because even though there's parts of the Bible that says it's not okay, there's other parts that says it's okay. So I found it very hard. But one thing that you can get them on is it says in the Bible that it is a serious sin to harm the environment. And when you explain to Christians and you actually show them, you could get them to watch Cowspiracy or really show them the facts, and show them that even eating a grass-fed beef is not okay either, that all animal agriculture is destroying the environment, that's something that at least can prep them, or get them at least thinking about, moving towards a vegan lifestyle. So, but, there is definitely a movement around the world in organized religion. Also, that's the same in Islam as well. It's a sin in the Quran to harm the environment. And so it's very hard to raise animals for food without, in some respect, harming the environment. So that's one thing. And then the second part of your question, Al Gore is vegan now, but I mean, he's very quiet about it. He's a bit embarrassed about it. He doesn't really like talking about it.
We won't have him on here then.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone asks him, he will say, yes, I am vegan, but it's not something he likes to talk about. Yeah, I mean, the politics is hard, but I guess we've all just got to keep trying. I mean, for me, it's just all about showing people the evidence in an inspiring way. And, you know, we just got to keep trying. And I think eventually we will get through to these people. And, you know, there really are some good politicians out there that want to do good. It's
Karin
just,
McCarthy.
yeah, exactly.
Karin
yeah,
McCarthy.
Exactly.
A number of others, actually. Chris Williamson.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Chris Williams, there's
Yeah.
several. Otto, brilliant. Thanks. Guys, we're going to wrap up now. Karin, let give you the honour. Let's wrap up.
Oh, gosh, well, I'm so inspired. I mean, where else can we actually hear from those gorgeous people that come and sit on our sofa?
We've done 10 sessions now.
I am frazzled. I just want to get out and get a bit of cake.
Yeah, well done.
But how wonderful. Amy, Otto and Ed, really inspirational in 3 different ways. We're all coming together for veganism because, you know, I know we're all pretty much vegan in here, but seriously, there's nothing to beat it. It is the best decision that you will ever make in your life. Let's hear it for Patrick. Look at him. He's the strongest vegan in the world. Look at him sitting in the back. It's Spot the Celebrity at VegFest.